Welcome to the ChargePoint podcast, brought to you by FlexiCharge, your gateway to the future of EV charging. In each episode, we dive deep into the world of EV infrastructure, offering insights and perspectives from industry leaders, innovators, and the people at the forefront of deploying charging solutions and networks. Join us to explore the exciting developments that are accelerating our world towards sustainable mobility.
And welcome back to the ChargePoint podcast, your go-to source for all things EV charging. I'm Christoph from FlexiCharge. In today's episode, we are exploring the fast-changing UK EV charging market. As one of Europe's leading ecosystems, the UK is making significant strides in EV adoption, but challenges like grid constraints, profitability pressures, and scaling infrastructure effectively remain key issues. To help us unpack this, we're thrilled to welcome two expert guests today. First, we'll hear from Adam Healy, Senior Consultant at Roland Berger UK, who will share findings from the latest research. Adam will discuss how the UK compares to other European markets, why its CPOs are uniquely positioned, and where the biggest opportunities and challenges lie. And this includes fleet charging and grid-related constraints. He will also offer practical recommendations for operators navigating this competitive space. We're also joined by Chantal Shearing, a respected e-mobility consultant who's been working for leading companies within the industry. Chantal will reflect on how the UK CPO market has evolved since 2018, back when she was instrumental in launching the Jaguar I-Pace. She shares insight into growing competition and highlights the critical role of CPOs in supporting grid stability through better flexibility. She will provide valuable advice on achieving sustainable growth in an increasingly competitive environment. Whether you're part of the industry or simply interested in the future of EV charging, this episode offers a thoughtful exploration of the UK's progress and challenges. So buckle up and let's dive into these conversations. Welcome to the ChargePoint podcast, a special edition about the UK market. And today, to start the show, we have Adam Healy from Roland Berger. Welcome, Adam. Can you maybe briefly introduce yourself to get started?
Thanks, Christoph. Hello to you, and thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Having listened to lots of your podcasts before, it's great to be the subject finally. My name's Adam Healy. I'm a principal at Roland Berger. We're a global consulting firm, and I work in our automotive and energy practice on the topic of EV charging in particular. So look forward to our discussion today. Great.
Thank you and welcome again. So some month ago, I listened to also another podcast which you published with your colleague where you were reporting on this major report that you came out with. So can you tell us a bit more about what were the topics, what were the markets included in this large report?
Yeah, so it's a very broad study that contains two parts. There's a data piece on the status of different markets, both in terms of how many EVs are there, how many chargers are there, what does that data say in terms of the status, the development of markets. And there's a second part, which is really the insightful bit that I think we learn something very new from every year, which is we survey EV users from countries across the world. And we ask them how they feel about their EV, how their charging experiences is, what type of charging they do. Do they charge at home? Do they charge in public? We ask all kinds of questions that gets us a bit of a picture, right, on how one country differs to the other one. How, people who use their EV for commuting in the UK charge differently to people who use their EV for going on holiday in France, for example, right? So we get some really interesting insights in this still early stage in the EV charging market.
Interesting, yeah, and we will of course share the link in the show notes for those who want to check it out. So, but can you give us some highlights? So, how does the UK market stand out versus other European markets?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? And it's a very topical question because, particularly in the UK at the moment, there are lots of questions about policy from government with the ZEV mandate, incentives, and so on. But my take from doing the report that we do every year for the last few years is that the UK is in an okay place, right, from an EV and an EV charging perspective. There's a few metrics that I think about when I compare one country to the next in terms of EV and EV charging, right? There's let's pick three. One is, of all the new vehicles or cars being sold, what percentage of them are an EV? There's, in all the cars or vehicles on the road today, what percentage are EV? And then there's what's the ratio of EVs per public charger, right? Which gives a good indicator of the health of the public charging landscape.
Right.
And if we dive a bit into those, right, you can compare where the UK is, right? So in terms of new vehicle registrations, EVs are in the UK, and I mean battery electric vehicles, something like 18% of cars sold in the UK this year, new cars sold, are EV, right? Relative to 17% in France, 13% in Germany, right? 13% average across the EU. So from that perspective, the UK is ahead of the pack, or at the front of the pack, right? Norway's doing 90%. So we've got a long way to go.
Yeah. And I can mention, and Denmark just made 61 last month. So we're also super fast. It's really accelerating.
There you go, right? There you go. The UK is not in the front, but it's in the kind of front of
the big countries.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And the trend is upwards, right? Not every country is on an upward trend. Germany is actually down this year versus last year, right? So
correct.
I think all in all, right, and you consider other countries, Austria, Spain, also down versus last year, right? So I think all in all, on that metric, we're doing okay. Back in September, we had a record month. We had 56,000 new battery electric vehicles registered in the UK in September. I think that's a record. I think only Germany in 1 month in 2023 has surpassed that. So look, it's good to be making kind of record headlines for good reasons and not bad reasons.
Yes.
So look, on that side, I think we're doing okay in the UK. In terms of how many, in terms of cars on the road today, we've got about 1.3 million cars that are battery electric out on the road today. That's about 4% of all the cars on the road. So 1 in every 25 cars is a battery electric vehicle out on the road today. No, that's, the EU average is 2%, Germany's 3%, France, we're still super early days, but again, we're kind of at the front of the pack of big European countries there. Obviously, Norway's at 24, 25%. Sweden, Belgium, Netherlands are somewhere above 5%, right? There are lots of good examples where countries have made faster progress, but I think we're doing okay.
And do you, if you look a bit in the crystal ball, what do you see in 25 shaping up the horizon in terms of continuous growth, slowdown, plateau? How does it? What's the mood?
That's the big question, and there's a lot of discussions ongoing right now between vehicle OEMs, government, regulators, right, around what the shape of the regulations, mandates look like in the next 5 to 10 years. I think I'm very hesitant to believe that we're just going to take off on the roller coaster. And suddenly there's going to be a flip in demand for EVs. But almost every year you've seen in the UK just a gradual increase in demand, a gradual increase in penetration in sales. And I expect that to continue, right? Steadily increasing. I'm not expecting we fall off a cliff. I'm not expecting a giant leap up within a few months. But I think we continue the progress.
Great. Yeah. Good. Thanks for that. Yeah. So, could we touch maybe a bit on the perception? How has that evolved? What's the actual experience, and then the tabloids trying to make headlines, right? And bashing some on the EV. We see that also happening in France, especially. So tell me a bit about this discrepancy.
Yeah, right. So, as you said, right, the UK is not alone in this battle between sensational headlines and slightly more balanced, nuanced, fact-based views, right? But it's important, right? Because it informs people's perception of EVs, right? You have people who've never gone near an EV telling you all these facts about EVs and how bad they are. And pick up the paper, right? You'll read headlines about queuing for chargers, broken chargers. EVs are expensive. EVs have low range. EVs break down. EVs explode.
Yes.
EVs explode, apparently.
Exactly.
So I think there's, we all know that. Fortunately, there's some balance, right? There's some more good news stories. That, the price of EVs is coming down and quickly, and that's making headlines. Running costs can be lower, right? That's being brought to attention. Charging is getting even more accessible. The public network is in a much, much, much better place than it was 3 or 4 years ago, and so on, right? So we're starting to see the tide turning, and I think there's some anecdotal evidence, right, that supports that. There's a YouGov survey, UK polling agency, said that 1 in 4 people in the UK intend their next car to be an EV. Good, right? There are surveys from the likes of ZapMap, right, showing that EV drivers tend to prefer their EV to petrol cars, and that very few EV owners are seriously considering going back, right? So things like that. Also in our charging index, right, that we talked about a couple of minutes ago. Some of the questions we ask are around what's your perception of your EV? What's your experience charging? In the most recent edition earlier this year, more than 80% of EV users in the UK said, I love having an EV and I take an active interest in running and charging it, right? So, people enjoy having an EV. It's not a burden. It's what people enjoy. On the charging side, we asked them, I'll have to check my stats, right? But we asked them some questions around charging, right? So we asked them, how has your EV charging experience been? Has it been good? Has it been positive? The percentage of people in the UK saying, yes, it is positive, went up from 60% a couple of years ago to 85% earlier this year. That's big step up.
That's reassuring.
We asked the same question across the world, right? We asked people in France, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, in America, right? And everyone's generally improving in this metric, but the UK is the one with the biggest step change over that period, right? And I think that reflects some of the work that's gone into the network, improving the amount of infrastructure, the quality of the infrastructure, making charging easier, more accessible. Look, like credit to the CPOs and everyone in the ecosystem for enabling that and for making that change. I think it's a very positive direction. People think charging is becoming more convenient and much easier. So yeah, everything going in the right direction.
Sounds good. Yeah. So exactly. So let's talk about a bit more about the UK CPO. So I think there's a particular fact about the CPO market landscape in the UK is that there's a lot of national players. So can you just for us to inform with the audience, can you mention a bit rapidly the national players and international players, but just top of your head, like who's the top 10, 15 names that you have, right? Please.
Yeah, so maybe before I dive into some names, right, it's an interesting landscape to characterize, right, because you've got the company types and then you've got the sort of national, international angle as well, right? So in the UK, the CPOs, it's really 3 or 4 buckets. It's independent CPOs, right? And these guys, honestly, right, have driven the sector in terms of charger rollout, user experience. These are people like Osprey, GridServe, Instavolt, Connected Curb, right? You've got the integrated energy, oil and gas companies, fuel forecourt gas station operators, BP, Shell, Total, MFG, others too. And then you've got the utilities, mostly international utilities, people like EDF, Statkraft. And then you've got Tesla. Of course, we can't forget Tesla, right? With a huge and great network. So there's kind of 3 or 4 different, let's say, company types in that landscape. And as you said, right, there's a difference between national players and international players. And, the UK's got regional players, right, who don't address the whole of the UK, but just Wales or just Scotland or just a couple of cities in the UK, right? So we've got a few of those. But maybe it's because we're an island, maybe it's Brexit, maybe it's the weather, right? But relatively few of the UK CPOs have focused on going international early on, right? They focused on getting things right in the UK. Serving the UK market is their main focus. Now, of course, right, we do see some of the pan-European networks like Ionity, Fastned in the UK. But then, right, maybe just going through the list, right? On the AC slow charging side, some of the leading CPOs are Ubitricity, Shell company, Connected Curb, independent, backed by financial investors like Aviva. You've got Podpoint, which was EDF. You've got Chargy, BP Pulse, Source London, which is Total. You've got ChargePlace Scotland, as the name says, up in Scotland. And you've got a couple of others like Blink, the US business, and Mer, which is the Statkraft business. In the UK, you've got something like 60,000 public AC chargers. The top 10 companies that I mentioned operate around 2/3 of those, right? So that's how that landscape looks. And then on the faster, higher power DC charging side, the companies we've got are Instavolt, Tesla, BP Pulse, Osprey, MFG, the fuel station operator, has got its own EV charging brand, EV Power. You've got GridServe, Shell Recharge, GD Point, ChargePlace Scotland, Podpoint, and I think interestingly, you've now got Sainsbury's, the supermarket chain, right, has developed its own CPO, right? So you have another kind of company type in the mix.
Interesting.
And again, right, in terms of something like 13,000, 14,000 of those chargers in the UK. And the top 10 operate around 3/4 of those, right? So lots of companies, a long tail of companies, top 10 doing 75% gives you an idea of the nature of that landscape.
Very interesting. Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah. So how are they doing the CPOs? If we talk in terms of economics, utilization rates, now that you have also a European understanding, so how do they fare? How are they doing?
Yeah, I mean, relatively speaking, I think CPOs in the UK are doing okay, right? I'm contrary to some headlines that you read, I don't think most of the CPOs are making money hand over fist, taking us all for a ride. I think utilization is still something that CPOs, most CPOs want to see increase over time. But I think the unit economics of operating a charge point have probably improved slightly over the last couple of years. So I think, relatively speaking, UK CPOs are okay. And the other metric that I bring up here is how many EVs are there on the road per public charger. And there are relatively more EVs on the road per, at least for public DC fast chargers in the UK than there are in France or Germany, right? The ratio is about double. So for every charger, there's kind of double the number of customers, double the demand for it. So I think in the UK, right, I think utilization's not flying, but I think we're just about okay. And look, we've seen more CPOs scaling up, investing in the networks, going from 10, 20 chargers to 100, 200 chargers. Clearly, right, there is appetite to install more chargers. I think that's healthy for the sector. I think that might not be the case if, operating chargers was just an impossible business, right? So it's tough. It's not easy, but I think that shows that there is still interest to do so. There's obviously a lot of challenges ahead. Managing cost and therefore profitability.
Yes.
Managing charger rollout, given the availability of locations that are attractive from a serving the user demand perspective, as well as actually having a grid connection that doesn't require you to build and install loads of completely new kit and invest in doing so. I think lots of those locations are probably gone. The easy ones are gone. And so there's a challenge ahead, right, as to how to balance the kind of rollout against the constraints.
Of course, the land grabbing, of course, is still, of course, completely a hot topic. Yeah, it's something we just talked about in the previous episode with the CEO of Zonic, who's helping CPO. A very interesting conversation too for those who haven't heard it yet. So land grabbing is still, of course, hot. And do you, if we touch briefly on the grid aspect, so is it part of so you said grid connection. What's the big picture in terms of grid opportunity and challenges for CPOs in the UK from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think there's an important. I think I've heard it's been said, it's probably true, right, that the UK grid is less well prepared for electrification of transportation and everything, the entire energy system than France, for example. I think there are good historical reasons why that's the case. I think it's important to know, right, before we get into opportunities, I think it's important to know that should help modulate the UK market in terms of demand and supply, because it's not possible or economically rational to just endlessly build out chargers. In the UK, you cannot just click your fingers and the DNO comes and does a grid reinforcement project for you and builds out chargers, right? They might say, yeah, we'll do it, but it's going to we'll do it in 8 years' time.
Exactly.
Good luck. So I think it's important to note, right, that will perhaps modulate the market from demand and supply, which is positive for utilization of chargers, for example. That might happen more so in the UK than it might in some other countries where the grid is better, right, for example. So it's important there. But I think what opportunities does this kind of situation create? There's opportunities for solutions that don't rely entirely on the grid connection. Battery storage, perhaps with some off-grid generation. I think you've discussed this one previously on another podcast, right? So let's not go really into the nuts and bolts of that, because that is really well covered in that podcast. But I think that's an opportunity for CPOs. I think it also gives CPOs a chance to really challenge their planning and right-size their projects and balance the current demand against the future demand, right? You speak to CPOs and they know they can't just add a new charger and a new 100 kilowatts of power every year. So it's difficult. They're trying to build for 20 years' time or 15 years' time. But I think it's healthy to have some questioning of that, right? Should you really build for 20 years' time? Because you don't know if in 20 years' time the demand of that site will be what you think it is.
No.
So I think it's a kind of healthy opportunity, right, for them to challenge their planning. I think the other one, right, on a sort of more macro level, I think it calls for a bit more clarity and regulation on like guidance to the ecosystem from regulators, from DNOs. Because I think ultimately we need to realize that this is a problem we're trying to solve together as DNO, as CPO, as regulator, as consultants, right? Like we're all trying to go in the same direction.
Yep.
I think there's already steps being taken here, right? So DNO is providing more transparency on, mapping their grid. Where on their grid is the status or the strength better or worse?
So
how long might upgrade works take? Right, because then if I'm putting charges in, I at least have some basis to go on. Okay, I'll prioritize this and I'll push this one back because it's just not going to happen anytime soon. Right, so more transparency, more clarity would be, I think, appreciated by all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's also something we discussed in the episode 7 with Shoshana Pato from RRP. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this publication of for availability of the grid. Yeah, it's so important for the planning. Great. Yeah, we mentioned when we were preparing. We talked about like emerging opportunities. So we mentioned briefly, and I think it's a big topic. We could speak for longer. But what's your view in short of the opportunity of last mile and heavy duty CPO activities in the coming years?
I mean, as you said, right, I think it's a topic for a whole new day. But all I would say is that it's clearly one of the next frontiers when we think about e-mobility and EV charging. From the last mile side, right, we know there are still massive challenges in electrifying fleets. I think it's been shown by some of the major fleet operators that having a fleet of vans and putting some chargers in a depot and running those vans is doable, right? I think people have proven that like it is not rocket science. It's not easy, but it's doable. But we know there are way more challenges that need solving, right? There's parking space challenges. There's charging space requirements and time requirements and fitting that in with the operation of the vehicle. So we need more solutions. We need solutions which are more than just kit out all the depots with AC chargers and hope for the best, right? We know those solutions are coming. There are innovative businesses all over the place with lots of different business models coming to solve that problem of fleets, space, charging. So I think it's very much a watch this space, but lots of exciting stuff happening. On the heavy duty side, I mean, we're still super early days everywhere. I would say the UK is half a step behind maybe countries like France when it comes to electric truck charging, just in terms of the number of chargers, the number of businesses, with very clear plans and activities. Given the work that's been going on in the UK under the ZEHID programme, we're definitely going in the right direction. Again, I'd expect to see a lot going on here in the next couple of years. I think we've now finally got the clarity. I mean, maybe you've had it for a long time, but I think we've finally got the clarity that when it comes to decarbonising heavy duty goods transport, EV is a big part of the solution, right? Yes, there'll be bits of hydrogen here and there. Yes, there'll be biogas. Yes, there'll be HVO, biodiesel. There'll be a mix, but I think we couldn't say with so much clarity 3 or 5 years ago that EV was going to be a big part of the mix. I think now we can, and that's really the next frontier for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a very exciting new track. Absolutely, and I think just like we usually say that EVs are not part of the problem, but they're part of the solution. For the grid, I think it's also the same with the trucks. I mean, it's huge batteries on wheel. How can we leverage them? And if we're smart, it really can boost this evolution. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So rounding up, if you had some suggestions or recommendation or thoughts to share with the CPOs that would be considering entering the UK market, what would there be?
Yeah, I mean, as usual, as a consultant, right, I would say the same answer to anyone, right? But make sure you understand the market that you're going for, right? If you're going for the commercial fleet, maybe heavy duty stuff, right? That might be a relatively unserved space right now, but it's super early days, right? So really understand the stage that the market is at, really understand what the demand looks like from operators of trucks, when they're going to electrify, like what they're going to do with their routes. That's an algorithm which hasn't been solved yet, right? So understand that. If you're going for passenger car public charging segment, understand what your play is, right? What is your value proposition to customers, people like me driving an EV around, and partners, right? People that you have land from, or people that you share some parts of your business with. There's no shortage of competition here in the UK in the CPO landscape, as we discussed a few minutes ago, right? So if you're coming to the UK on that side, have a very clear view of what it is that you do and how it's different from others. Be prepared, whichever way you go, be prepared for some uncertainty in terms of planning, locations, grid connections, and so on. And think macro and micro in terms of your network, right? When you come to plan out your network, I think I've seen CPOs thinking about going into new markets, and they've immediately honed in on the sort of micro characteristics of a couple of locations. But I think it's also important to consider some of the bigger picture stuff that's going on in the UK, right? What is the EV penetration looking like? What is the rollout of chargers at a market level going to look like? How does that impact your business case? So keep the bigger picture in mind as well as the micro picture.
Adam, in terms of expansion abroad, so how are the CPOs from the UK? How active are they going beyond the borders?
Yeah, I think most UK CPOs made it their number one priority at first, right, to focus on the UK, getting a solid base at home. But we started to see some examples of some of the UK CPOs going abroad, right? So InstaVolt, one of the leading public DC CPOs, it's got chargers in Iceland already, and it's planning an expansion in Spain and Portugal. You've got Raw charging with chargers in France and Italy. You've got GridServe Global, right, which is coming out of GridServe. Details aren't clear to me, but that's clear that that's the direction GridServe is going in, right? It's taking their capability in charging and beyond abroad. And, there are a couple of others early in their journey of expanding, right? Going to the Nordics or going to another part of Europe. I think so. We haven't seen this as the central focus of UK CPOs to date, but I expect we will see more in the future.
Great. Well, thank you, Adam. We will also share a link to your profile in the show notes for those who might want to get in touch with you and get even more insight if they want to dig into the UK markets. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us here on the ChargePoint podcast. And looking forward to speaking with you sometime again in the near future. And wishing you a nice afternoon.
Thanks, Christoph. Enjoyed it. Thanks very much.
Thank you. In today's episode, where we dive deeper into the UK EV charging market, I have the pleasure to have Chantal Shearing in the hot seat today. Chantal, welcome to the ChargePoint podcast. Can you please introduce yourself to get started?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Christoph. So, hi, I'm Chantal Shearing. I've worked directly within the automotive industry and in consultancy over the last 26 years, and with the last of that 8 being specifically involved in electrification of vehicles, charging infrastructure and e-mobility. So previously I've worked with Jaguar Land Rover, Mobilise Renault Group, and at a transport consultancy, and now working as an independent consultant in automotive and electrification.
Fantastic. That makes you definitely one that really knows the industry with 8 years. That's like decades in other industries. It's great to have you on the show today. Can you please tell us a bit how you see the CPO market, how it has evolved since 2018 when you stepped into the industry?
Yeah, sure. So the market has evolved quite a lot since then. So we've seen considerable growth in the quantity of public charging or EV charging stations all over the UK. And more recently, we're now up to 70,000 devices, according to ZapMap in the UK. Now, that's 17,500 added to the UK network, which was more than there was entirely added in 2023.
Impressive.
So it's really a huge rise, really, in the numbers. Now, in those early days of development, that growth was very much from within the UK. A kind of island effect with very few entrants from outside the UK in those initial years. some very strong internal UK national players dominating and driving growth in the market. I think one aspect of change in the UK market has been the gradual acceptance of the mobility service provider or an aggregator. The UK market, or CPOs, were slow in accepting this model into their offering and really has improved customer experience and provide the ability to roam across the network using a single entry point for either an app or an RFID. And really that ability is quite driven within that market.
Yeah, exciting evolution. Yeah, I think you shared when we were preparing some anecdotes about the very early days when you're preparing the charging offering for Jaguar Land Rover for the launch of the I-Pace. It was, it's a different reality now. Luckily,
yeah, definitely. Yeah, we spent a long while driving around every charge point in the UK, and when we developing I-Pace, just to test and understand what each charge point would do. So.
Yeah, exciting to see the evolution. So what's the current level of competition on the CPO market? From your point of view.
So in the last few years, we've seen many new entrants in the market and other CPOs that have ended up taking over other networks. So we've had this sort of expansion and then sort of a little bit smaller sort of some coming together. But what's really emerged are a few different model offerings and a focus in the speed of charging, perhaps by each of the CPOs in the market.
Yes.
So as an example, the likes of Connected Curb and Chargy, they've kind of while they offer higher charging solutions, they've focused on solving the issue of on-street charging in residential areas. And then on the other end of the scale, you've got the likes of Instavolt, Osprey, Ionity and GridServe making up the majority of on-journey fast charging. This end of the market is probably many more players. And while, those mentioned along with BP, Shell and many more I could mention, in that space, each has worked very hard on trying to differentiate on their offerings, whether that be by location or, GridServe, for example, the charging hub offer and motor fuel groups have gone on to the petrol forecourts with their offering. But to summarise, I guess the main shift in this market is really driven by that need of current and prospective EV drivers who've really long worried about the volume and an awareness of that on-the-go charging. So I think that's where the biggest growth has been in the market.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. Interesting. Absolutely. So what, according to you, what role can or are the CPOs playing when it comes to one of our favorite topics, grid stability? And the overall transition to net zero. And maybe you could mention some kind of new collaborations that you might spot emerging or on the horizon. Yeah,
sure. So this is really an interesting sort of area that's really still emerging. So it's not very fully developed. The basics are in place. Most of the majority of CPOs all ensure they're sourcing renewable energy for the charging stations. That's kind of the baseline. But in more recent months and through collaborations directly with those utility companies, we're also seeing some of them operate as aggregators for charge points. And as part of that, with the service, they started offering a little bit more dynamic pricing. And this is what I really start to think we'll start to see develop further over time. So currently, the main model is set periods of pricing at specific times. So, for example, charging during the daytime on a lamppost charger is more expensive than in the evenings between a certain time. So less dynamic and not really addressing that live energy fluctuations in the grid. However, we're really starting to see that flexibility enjoyed by the home charging users starting to come into that public arena with specific targeted campaigns that notify drivers of days and times when charging on a specific CPO station. will be reduced. And so really addressing the potential grid issues, incentivizing those that can charge within a specific window. Now, an example of that collaboration is recently with Octopus and their Electroverse platform and Osprey. They've partnered to offer price drops for charging at specific times. And at present, while there's not many of those charging windows are during times that might be appeal to many customers. So there could be less scope for habit change due to a specific customer needs in that area.
Yeah, understand. Yeah, clearly. And is it an alert on the phone, or is it email campaigns well in advance, or how are they organized?
It tends to be alert. So it's kind of it's very much working on a flexibility and mirroring what most customers will see if they do the same thing at home. It's that kind of initial, if you everybody charge now if you can.
Yes.
But as I said, it will be really interesting to see how that works over time, because as we've said, there's less flexibility for a driver when they choose to use public charging, especially if they're on a journey. It's the journey that dictates when they charge, or the length of the journey that dictates when they charge, not necessarily that at 10 p.m. at certain stations I can
absolutely,
get.
Yeah. But hopefully we can expect that, some will want to grab the opportunity to save a bit of money, right? So if they are anyway on the road, going from A to B, maybe stopping 10, 15 minutes extra to top up from, I don't know, maybe they have 50%, they want to go up to 80 at a really good price.
Yes.
Again, we can imagine that it's even a money-making machine, or money for the CPOs themselves and the utilities,
absolutely.
right? They're stabilizing the grid. We know that. So thereby, if they can pass on the savings, we're talking about maybe almost free charging. You could imagine amazing campaigns, right?
And I really think, like as we said, like the user case on journey is a little bit tougher, as in customers have journeys that they specifically do, but with the growing case of on-street residential charging, that's definitely a solution where a vehicle is parked for longer. It's the equivalent of that customer using a home charging who's not able to access.
Right.
And so you can really see that flexibility model really just mirroring literally what a customer would have if they could have a home charger. And obviously that's a big need at the moment from customers.
Yeah, and for CPOs, creating the preference by making really attractive night tariffs if you find a park spot with their charger on the street. Yeah, right. Really interesting. Yeah, it's only the beginning. Great. Yeah. So with your view on the market and your understanding and extensive knowledge, so what in your eyes makes some CPO more successful than others in the UK? And would you maybe could you maybe share a few pieces of advice to potential new entrants that are in the UK markets?
Yeah, sure. So I think in terms of more successful than others, I think the successful operators and entrants in the UK market will be those that are really getting the customer experience right from start to finish. If we take the charge station hardware out of the loop, it's hardware, and just see that as a commodity, that the key points really from my point of view that really need to be addressed to be successful are a few core actions really. So one, location. A good location obviously is paramount, with enough stations to meet the demand. So there's some real careful kind of planning in regards to that.
Right.
There's second and third one really around reliability and user experience. So in my opinion, they're the most important factors. So if we take reliability, knowing that a charging station that you're going to is looked after, it's maintained, but equally being able to clearly see if it's not or it's broken, whether that's via the app, whether that's connected to in-car services, is a real big plus.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, user experience is next, really, for me, from start to finish. But when paying for your charge, whatever your preference, and we know there are multiple preferences,
Right.
whether it's an app, RFID, contactless, it needs to be straightforward and consistent. We often go to different stations and we have convoluted different methods in and around how we would start to charge. So I'd also venture that those CPOs in the earlier days that really embraced roaming, which is now a requirement on UK networks as of this month, we'll see more loyalty from customers. You know, I certainly have my favourite networks that I use and locations to charge. And, you know, a lot of that's based on reliability and a good experience that I know is easy to do. But I think the key, I mean, this will be for any operator. Pricing for public charging in the UK remains an issue. We have a 20% VAT markup on energy. That's a big barrier. So pricing offers are quite limited. You know, it's quite sort of level across the board of all of the higher and rapid chargers. And, you know, sometimes we enable through subscriptions, particular networks, the consumer can get a little bit of a better price. But the UK market and the UK consumer is more energy price conscious now than they've ever been before. So any operator that can harness their network to improve pricing for public charging will see repeat usage. It's kind of an obvious.
Yeah.
But just to summarize, really, for me, reliability, accessibility, ease of use, fortunately, all being addressed in the new regulations for public charging in the UK that have come in. That's really how a CPO will be successful and nailing that customer experience from start to finish.
Yeah.
With the cherry on top being a great energy price.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those are all challenges. And what about maybe collaboration with car manufacturers? I mean, you've been there, right? So how do you see the collaboration potential? What's the relationship? How is it evolving? Where are we? And is this interesting?
I mean, the key developments are going to be with in-car charging or charge and go, you know, plug and charge.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that ability to do those things within the vehicle. Yes, obviously, at the moment you will still need to get out and put the charge point into the vehicle. But the other thing is really about information exchange. You know, knowing great telematics of charge points into the vehicle, absolutely key. And obviously working with OEMs directly and collaborations will enhance that. There is nothing worse than a user being directed to a charger that doesn't exist, or they can't see in a dynamic way that the charger is actually active, you know, to the point of knowing that there's 4 chargers available out of the 10 that are there.
Yeah.
That, I think, it's definitely communication, better information flow will definitely will support this market, and that's where the OEMs can definitely collaborate.
Yeah. And maybe a last word, a few thoughts on the future of the electrification of heavy duty. Any thoughts, you know, spontaneously on where it's going in the UK? Where is it, or at which stage is it? If you look at it in the UK versus the rest of Europe, and what do you foresee, or what are you looking forward to following?
So, I mean, it's very early days in the UK, especially on the very heavy and sort of more towards megawatt charging and those aspects.
Yes.
Probably less developed in Europe, but we're starting to see companies start to come over, trial in very specific locations. The issue will always, as it's like taking the public charging model for passenger cars, the issues will still be the same. Location and where to locate, you know, those kind of aspects, the quantity,
yes,
and where they're situated, and obviously the cost and where does the cost bear. So yeah, that's going to be a really interesting. It's it's like the car charging issue, only literally exploded to be a larger problem.
A larger problem. Interesting. Well, thank you very much again for joining, Chantal, and looking forward to keeping in touch with you and wishing you a great afternoon. And that's a wrap for today's episode of the ChargePoint podcast. We've covered a lot today, and a big thank you goes to Adam Healy and Chantal Shearing for sharing their expertise. Adam gave us a really interesting detailed look at how the UK compares to other European markets, highlighting the unique position of its charge point operators and the challenges of achieving profitability, an area where the CPOs in the UK seem to be in quite good position compared to the main continent. Chantal reflected on how the market has evolved since 2018, sharing her insights on the increasing competition among CPOs. I found it particularly interesting to hear how dynamic pricing is starting to become a competitive factor, which in my opinion sets the UK market in the category of most mature markets like the Nordic markets. This is just the beginning of our deep dive into this fascinating UK EV charging market. In the next episode, part 2, we'll be joined by 2 more industry experts to continue exploring the challenges and the opportunities shaping this rapidly evolving landscape. If you want to be sure not to miss the next episode, then remember to subscribe to the podcast. As always, if you have any suggestions for future guests from the EV charging or energy sector, feel free to drop us an email at hello@flexicharge.com. And by the way, that guest could be you. Don't be shy. Until our next episode, take care and drive safely.